Hey y'all, so Project Lightning Bug. I told you guys the trans, we lost 30 gear. We decided to undertake the 5-speed conversion. Let me tell you, finding a parts car has been a pain in the ass. Located a guy out of Texas, Brian. He's been awesome. He had a car that he was parting out, and he sent me everything I needed. So, I'm going to show you this pile of parts. It's quite invigorating, quite daunting. I don't know the correct term. So let me show you what we got going on here, and we'll go from there. Looking at the pile of parts for the 5-speed swap. So, pardon my shadow. Got the wiring harness for the manual trans and engine, along with the starter wiring. You got the shift plate and the shift linkage. We've got the brackets for the trans that go in there. 5-speed. I have a clutch master from a Mazda B2500, and I went that route because I didn't want to tie into the brake line. I read somewhere that the Mazda setup, Protege setup, goes into the brake line, and I wasn't comfortable with that. So you guys can see here's the factory Mazda Protege clutch master, and over there's the slave. There's a starter, intermediate shaft. That is a manual starter, by the way. Intermediate shaft, pedals, the mid plate or engine plate between the flywheel and the engine, all the miscellaneous hardware. I got some Exile Auto Works bushings for the shifter, along with a push rod for the clutch master. Shifter from Scott at Exile. Big shout out to Brian in Texas for sending me all these parts. Parted out one of his proteges to hook me up. They gave me a really fair price. We have a Clutch Max Stage 2 clutch and flywheel and pressure plate, along with the pilot bearing and the alignment tools inside the box. Aside from that, we have miscellaneous bolts and hardware that came with it all. So I'm going to start by unplugging the electrical first on Project Lightning Bug. And don't ignore all this crap. This is just, we got some new coils, new plug wires that are going on this. And then that's not part of the 5-speed swap. I just happened to come across it while I'm recording. This is the ECM for the 5-speed. You need a 5-speed computer for it to work. So we'll get in here and we'll start taking apart the airbox assembly and everything else and prepping to drop the automatic. Now, no fault to Brian in Texas. I feel bad for him. This is what happens when UPS is full of idiots and they put a 90-pound transmission on top of a box. This was a really clean gauge cluster, so unfortunately I can't use it. So you don't need the gauge cluster when 5-speed swapping unless you have a Triptronic transmission. If you have the standard auto, your auto cluster will work. So let me get underneath the hood and show you guys what I got going on. Okay, so we got all the wiring done up top. Yes. Every little plug, ground wire, etc. Including where it plugs in to, this sits on your shock tower, strut tower. And then you've got wiring down here for your fuse block. This one goes to fuse block. So now that that's all done, we're going to go underneath the Mazda and undo all the electrical down there and start going through some of the final connections and stuff. If you look at your fuse block and you guys struggle to get these plugs out like I did, no, these don't just unclip. These actually slide out like that. Same, and then it'll disconnect your wiring. Just if you guys are ever pulling the plug wires, they just boom. So little tip for you guys out there. Now we'll go down under the car, and I'm probably going to actually stop for today. This video is going to consist of several days worth of work. But I think we're going to do the electrical underneath, going to do the shift cable down there, and need to drain the trans and get that ready to go. So on the bottom side of the Mazda, we have the alternator wiring here, and then we have a clip up here, and what we're going to do is open this up and get that undone. And then over here we have, if you guys can see on the side of the starter, your positive and your negatives on the starter. You have a clip down here on the transmission, or wiring down here on the transmission, and we're going to disconnect all these, and then our engine harness will be almost ready to pull out. Well, the starter harness will be able to pull out, and then we have to access, get my camera in here, the harness up here. You guys see that? That goes in the firewall for the computer and a few of the electronics inside the car. And I know I don't show you guys me actually doing the physical work. It's just hard to work and be productive while holding the camera. So I'll show you guys the before and afters. So let me get this out and apart, and we'll go from there. So we got the starting harness off for the starter, the trans, and the alternator. The main harness is still in the vehicle. You guys can see the main wiring here. We have to move inside to get to the computer and all the other wiring, including the wiring for the fuel pump. When we go inside, we're going to start there, and I'll probably end up doing this video in different parts just for that fact, because of how much work there is involved in this. So let me go inside and we'll show you what we're doing. So inside, you've got the kick panel, the sill plate. Those are already pulled. And let me get my light situated here so you guys can see. If you guys pull back the carpet, you guys can see there is a metal plate down here for the passenger footwell. Now I gotta still pull this panel off, and it's kind of hard to do one-handed. So pop this out, roll the carpet back, get to access the computer, and I'm gonna assume that this is my fuel pump wiring. I'll have to pull the back seat and go from there to get that out. Alright, so you guys can see from where I started with the interior, we end up going a lot further. Back seat's out, center console's out, all the seats are out. So I was wrong. That wire there that runs along that sill plate does not go to the fuel pump. The wiring actually runs down in here under the center console, back here to an access panel, and right through here. Then it feeds to the dash. Then it all comes into a hole under the passenger side where the computer sits. Now, the cool thing about the Mazda that I noticed is the automatic shift cable bolted there. It has a rubber plug that sits on the floor like this, just like that. So it's ready to accept the 5-speed shifter plate or shift linkage. Now what we'll do is we'll pull all the wiring out from underneath the hood, and we'll have that whole harness out on the ground. So I'll get that done and then we'll conclude this video. After we get all the ties cut underneath, we are back up top. Discovered there's a nut. You guys can barely see it right between these two hoses that hold the harness on. And then we'll pull the harness free. That should be the end of part 1 of getting the electronics, or getting the automatic crap out of the way. I don't know if you guys can see this. Let me move this out of the way here. See that nut right down there? My finger's kind of pointing at it. So that'll hold your harness in. Let me get that off. I believe it to be a 10 mil. It's going to be kind of a trick to get in there. But we'll get that loose, and we should be able to get the main harness out. So you guys can see the socket goes down in there. Kind of hard to get to. 10 millimeter. Probably a quarter-inch drive with longer extensions would have been better. But let's try to get my camera down in here, guys. Nah, it ain't gonna work, guys. Sorry, I tried. But anyways, 10 millimeter, 3/8 extensions seem to work. We'll get this loosened up, dropped his nut. Should be able to get the harness out. Then you're going to want somebody on the inside feeding the harness through the firewall as you pull it out. Well, y'all, that nut I took off did me absolutely no good. I thought it held the bracket in for the wiring, but there ends up being some electrical tape with a zip tie. It's the easiest way to go. Cut the zip tie and the loom comes free. Now we're starting to feed it. Well, I'm starting to feed it through the firewall and underneath the vehicle. And you've got to be in two places at once to feed it as you go. So I'm going to crawl underneath here and show you guys where I'm at. I've been pushing it through the firewall from the inside slowly, trying to get as much wiring through. You guys can see the harness coming out here, like so. And the hardest part is getting this all pulled in one general area, because you're limited for space doing this with the engine in the car. So we're going to try to feed it around everything we can, and it's kind of hard to do this with a handful phone. So let me see what I can get pulled through here. The hole in the firewall is quite a pain in the butt to get to. Here, let me get this out of the way so you guys can see. See, everything's coming through this hole right here. And there's a long wire that runs all the way back from the fuel pump that I have laying in the vehicle. And trying to be in two places at once just is not cooperating with my system. And then the other hard part is going to be feeding all this through the hoses here, because you guys could tell that's the harness that we saw up top. See this? So I got to feed all that through, and I might have to put my phone down and hope for the best camera angle I can get by laying it on my belly. I doubt that's going to work. If not, I'll have to be with y'all in a minute here, because there's no room. You guys can see the hole in the firewall. Just feeding everything through it. And the goal is, what I'm going to have to do, get all this into the engine bay and then pull it out from the bottom of the vehicle. It's the only way it's going to work with only me. If I had two people, it'd be a lot easier. And I know I'm breathing heavy. Sorry guys, I'm fat. So, we'll get this fed out. So, we got the main harness out of the cab, out of the car. You guys, and now it's down here with me. Of course, we always got a few plugs that get snug up in the hard to reach places. So we'll get this down, get this pulled, and then start feeding it from the other side and down. Well, hi, are you here to help? Are you in my way? Thanks for the help, Rosa. Main harness on the ground. It ended up being a two-person job. It's a really tight fit around. Rosa, move your butt. It's really a tight fit around all the hoses and crap underneath there. I think if I did this job a second time, I'd probably pull the motor. But this is going to conclude part one of the trans swap. You guys can see how much better it looks with all the wiring. Now we're going to come in here. We're going to start cleaning all this stuff up. We're going to take the brackets out. I've got to find a way to support the motor. I'm thinking of using a 4x4 across the engine compartment. So that being said, end of part one. Probably be a 3-part setup with all the pain in the butt it is, including I have a fix for this. We're going to make our own cold air intake for this thing as part of this series of videos. Thanks for watching, y'all. God bless.